My guest today is author Colum McCann. His novels include Zoli, Dancer, The Sight of Brightness, and Song Dogs. He is also the author of short stories, and his short film, Everything This Country Must, was nominated for an Oscar in 2005. He teaches writing at Hunter College and contributes to The New Yorker, The New York Times Review, The Atlantic Monthly, and The Paris Review. His book, Let the Great World Spin, has been nominated for this year's National Book Award. Hi, Colum.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. Congratulations on the nomination for the book.
Thank you so much.
If listeners haven't read the book yet, I hope they will. It's a beautiful book.
Oh, you're very nice.
Did you by chance happen to see the cover of today's New York Times yet?
I did not know.
I see. Well, that's because you have 3 children. Soon you will, though. I should say it's November 3rd because anybody who's listening to this might look at today's New York Times and find it's November 5th and say, what is she talking about? No matter how one feels about war in general or the two we're in now, there's a photo on the cover which I found halting and haunting. It's an aerial view of the tip of Manhattan, and in the foreground is a ship, and in the background is the place that was the site of the World Trade Center. And the ship is the USS New York, which was just built with 7.5 tons of steel from the World Trade Center. And it made me think about your short story from a while ago, A Basket Full of Wallpaper, is about a Japanese immigrant who moves to Cork after World War II, and he refuses to talk about the horrible things he's seen. Your current book is sort of like that, isn't it? You're talking about something you're not talking about. While the story takes place mainly in 1974, the inspiration was September 11th, 2001. Can you recount what that day was like for you, the story you told at the Irish Embassy about your father-in-law?
That's right. I mean, so much revolves around how we choose to tell our stories, and if we hit them, head on, or if we choose to go out in some sort of oblique, roundabout way. But what happened for me was on September the 11th, my father-in-law was in the first building to be hit, the second building to come down, and he got out, thankfully, but with about 90 seconds to spare, and got hit by falling debris and was covered in dust and so on, and came up to our house where we were living in New York on 71st Street, and my little daughter ran down the corridor, jumped into his arms, and was shouting, "Poppy, Poppy, Poppy," and but then she recoiled from him and went away and hid, and when I asked her later what was going on, she said, well, Poppy was burning. And I was like, no, Poppy wasn't burning. Poppy was, he just had smoke on his clothes from a fire that had gone on downtown. And then she said, no, but you don't understand, Poppy's burning from the inside out. And it was one of those things that when I think about it, it's like, I mean, it was obviously meant as a 4-year-old would mean these things, but could also have worked on a sort of allegorical level for all sorts of things. And those days then after 9/11 were filled with sort of all sorts of haunting images for me and for everybody, for you, for people in Belfast, for people in London, Madrid, in Baghdad. I mean, and then my challenge as a writer was how to try to negotiate this without being too on the nose about it. And then I remembered that spectacular walk that Philippe Petit did between the World Trade Center towers in 74, and when he walked back and forth 8 times between the two towers, a quarter of a mile in the air, kind of startling thing. And so I used that as a fulcrum image from which to talk about sort of, I suppose, my own feelings about 9/11, because I don't think I have anything particularly new or startling to bring to people except a sort of an emotional landscape.
For those who haven't read the book, it's a New York story, but it's more than that. It's universal. It's a collection of characters who are at times desperate and seemingly disparate, yet intertwined. It's about the apparent randomness of crossing paths. The book is, to quote a line in your last chapter, the collision point of stories. And I know you've said before that about previous books that you don't know where you're going with the book while you're writing it, but I couldn't help but think this book required a serious outline. How did it unfold?
It had no outline.
Wow.
Isn't that bizarre? It just sort of unfolded, and one character met another. I mean, it's kind of disingenuous to say that it had no outline, because it at first it didn't have an outline, but then I got to a certain final point, and then I would go back and try to shape it. And at that stage, you have an outline. It's almost as if you're an explorer and you've gone into the wilderness and you've mapped the wilderness as you went along, and then you reach a certain point. You can look backwards at what you've done, and that has become the outline for the later work, so that you edit and you revise and you push and you cut and you change in all sorts of extraordinary ways. So you form your own outline as you go along, but the language and the stories that you choose to tell are the things that sort of shape the content. For me, it was just go cast yourself out to sea, be prepared to be lost for a little while, but eventually you'll hit some sort of land,
Well, I wanted to ask you about coincidence, because there are these aha moments throughout the book that sneak up on you. And I'm thinking about two examples. One is there's a line, docket ending 687, she says, The People versus Tilly and Jaslyn Henderson.
Right.
And another one was, my second and last marriage left me 11 floors up in the Bronx projects with my 3 boys, and I suppose, in a way, with those 2 baby girls. Do you know what I mean? Do you think maybe there are no coincidences, and were you contemplating that when writing the book?
What's interesting to me is, there's a lot of coincidence there, and there's a lot of chance. I'm not so interested in the ideas of absolute coincidence or absolute chance. I think we're all sort of intricately involved with one another in ways that we don't necessarily know, and sometimes ways that we don't, really, really remember. I recall being a youngster, going to London and visiting my grandfather for the first time, and to cut a long story short, I ended up going to a restaurant with my father afterwards, and this Irish waitress bought me an ice cream, and she touched me on the side of the face, and for me, it was a moment I would never, ever, ever forget. In fact, every time I go back to London, I remember that particular moment. But for her, it was just one of those little things that she did during the day. She probably forgot it the next day.
Right.
And sometimes we don't absolutely know what we do, but all those little things have a startling effect. It's like the old, butterfly flaps its wings, affects the thunderstorm. Butterfly flaps its wings in China, affects the thunderstorm in New York or wherever it happens to be.
That's the end of part 1 of the podcast. In part 2, Colum speaks about recovery, grief, Irishness, and New York.